I have a great story about this from Spotify. That's what they were spending their time on, right? They weren't spending their time on like AI or discovery playlists or anything like that. They were like, oh, well, we would just build our own. And there was 4 different teams rolling their own. And when I got done, there was maybe 20 different systems people were using. And it was a free for all. And everybody had to figure out how they were going to release when they got to the team. They also weren't using like any standardization like Jira or whatever. People had sticky notes of what they were building on the walls. There were Trello, there was Jira, there was whatever you want, Asana. It didn't matter, right? Spotify was so obsessed with autonomy that any team could work the way they wanted. That broke.
Hey there, welcome back to the show. My name is Afonso and today's guest is Melissa Perri. Melissa and I met in Madrid last year. We had a lovely dinner and lunch over some really tasty Spanish tapas. I love it. And we talked about all things product and all things product ops, because at the time she was finishing her new book on product ops. And I'm very happy that the book has been out for a while now, and I'm very happy to share some of those views on product ops with you. Melissa has done so much. She authored the best-selling book, The Build Trap, runs a successful CPO Accelerator, is a former professor at Harvard Business School, serves on several boards, is the founder of Product Institute, and so much more. Anyway, if you're digging into product ops these days, this episode is for you. We'll dig right into it after a short message. We have spoken so many times on this podcast about how talking frequently with users is so important for product teams. It lets you understand user needs, test their designs, and make sure you're building the right products. But many teams tell me that they can't find time for it in their busy workday because recruiting the right users is too hard. So I want to quickly mention a company I'm advising that can help you with this. UX Signals lets you target users inside your website or app and automatically book interviews into your calendar. So you can put the recruiting on autopilot and just show up for the conversations. Instead of waiting weeks, you can get interviews within a few hours and talk to people while they will still have the user experience fresh in their minds. It's used by big companies and public organizations like DNB Bank, Vips Mobile Pay, Nav, and many, many more, who are building digital products and services with millions of users. I really recommend checking it out on uxsignals.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Tell them Afonso sent you and you'll get a 50% off your trial. Melissa, we are live. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Good to see you again. Melissa, you are an absolute legend in the product management community. You taught at Harvard Business School. You wrote the iconic book, Escaping the Build Trap. You are the founder of Product Institute. You run a really successful CPO Accelerator. Really great reviews from friends, CPO friends that have taken it, by the way. You are a board member in various organizations, and you wrote last year a new book called Product Ops. And I want to talk about product ops with you, all things product ops, and also about some all things CPO if we have time. But before we get started, how do you have time to do all of this? I mean, it's so impressive. How do you do this?
It's funny. I did talk to people a lot. I burned out pretty hard at the end of 2020, and I've learned to focus my work, but it's still a lot. Sometimes I sit there and I go, what am I doing? But I'm not happy when I'm not busy. So obviously I'm just always busy. And what I try to focus on is things that scale. So everything that I do now is something that can help scale. But the only thing that doesn't really scale is the board roles that I'm doing. But that's fun for me because we're diving deep into product strategy and getting the right people in the organization. And I love working with organizations long term to actually see how they grow and how it happens. So I love the board roles because I get to practice everything that I preach, right? And we get to put it into play, and then we get to see how it works out, and you get to learn all about all these different organizations. So I do sleep. I do want to let people know. I'm not one of those crazy people. I hate those people on Twitter who are like, oh, I wake up at 5 a.m. and like I go all day and I do this and I do that. I'm not that type of person, but I do sleep.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you're not the 5 a.m. Club type of person who wakes up at 4, does 1 hour meditation, then goes for a 2 hour marathon, and yeah,
No.
okay.
It was funny because the last time I saw you, right, was in, I think, where were we? Were we in Lisbon?
Madrid.
Madrid, right?
No, I think it was
Yeah,
Madrid. Yeah, yeah.
it was Madrid. And that I became a weird, it became a weird news article in the Huffington Post in Spain because I was complaining that nobody slept in Spain. That was the last time I saw you. And I was like, how do
I
people do
remember.
this? They eat dinner at 10, they go out till like 12, then they go to the club
Yeah, I
till
remember that.
5, and then everybody goes to work in the morning. And I was like, I can't operate like this.
I remember that. I actually remember that. You posted that Sunday and we talked about it. That was amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Melissa, let's get started. Product ops. There's a lot of confusion about product ops, and I'm so happy that you wrote the book. It has come at a time to clarify a lot of these things. And I want to start by we had Marty Kagan on the podcast. We talked a little bit about product ops, and he has written some stuff about this that I think is causing some confusion as well, but also bringing in the good definitions, and he argues that your definition is one of the good ones, as he puts it. But I want to explore that a little bit. So I'm gonna just quote something he said, and then we explore that and take it from there. So he says, in many companies, the latest trend in this dangerous direction is the rise of product ops. It's important to acknowledge that there are several very different definitions of product ops out there, but unfortunately, one of the most common definitions is to have a person or an entire team of people that exist to provide the process, tools, and methods for the broader product organization. So clearly, there's some misconceptions here of what product ops is. There are people that are potentially misusing this. So let's get started with what is product ops for you. Enlighten us with what we should be thinking about when we think about product ops.
Yeah, I think the thing about product ops is it's the infrastructure that helps product management scale well in an organization. So what we have to look at when we design product ops in an organization is what do we need to help scale, and what will keep us making great decisions about our products, and what will help us get good products out, right? That's the whole point of product ops. So when Denise and I talk about product ops, we talk about it in 3 different pillars, but those pillars really are focused around how do we get the right insights into product strategy? Then how do we have a good governance around revisiting our product strategy and our processes, and around how do we get our products out the door, right? How do we all work together? And it's not so much, Scrum based or development based, but it's things like how do we work with go to market to make sure that when we launch our product, it's not going to fall flat on marketing, right? What kind of guidelines do we need for working cross-functionally across the organization? When should we review roadmaps? What do the roadmaps actually look like? All of these things start to break down when you start to scale companies. And that's really where I focus. So I'll tell you why I started thinking about product ops and why I thought it was so critical.
Yep.
So let's start there, because I think when people are confused about product ops, they have not had the same experiences that I have had when I've been trying to scale organizations. So this is what I've done for the last 10 years. I've worked with really large enterprise organizations that have had something like, some of them have 20,000 product managers. Some of them have 3,000. Some of them have 300 product managers. They're global. They're not just a SaaS startup in Silicon Valley. I've also worked with SaaS scale-ups where we are going from let's say 50 people to 100 people to 200 people, or we're going from 13 people to 50 people. And they're going from one product to multi-portfolio. Now, in each of these organizations, what happens is once you stop being a startup where a product leader can go to their 5 product managers and ask them what's going on, everything starts to break for what you used to operate wise. You have to think about, from a CPO perspective, org structure, of course. You have to think about how you set your product strategy for multiple product lines. And then you have to keep on top of that and keep revisiting it. So what happened is I would come in either as an interim CPO to these organizations, or I'd be advising their CPOs on what to do to set up these organizations for scale when they have not done this before. So when you're starting to scale these organizations as a chief product officer, you have to make a bunch of decisions about how you're going to scale. And the ways that you used to work when you were a small company with like 5 product managers that you could say, hey, what are you working on? What are you working on? Just start to fail. So that's where product ops starts to come into play. It's like, what do we do to help create our operating model and our infrastructure so that we can go from 5 people to 20 people to 50 people to 100 and then thousands? That's what we're looking at here. So I first got introduced to product ops when I was leading the transformation at Athena Health. We had 365 product managers. We had 5,000 people in the organization. And I was responsible for making product management work. So I was working with the chief product officer, and I did everything from help them set product strategy to train all the product managers. And we got to this point where we're looking around and all the things that we would talk about, right, when it comes to product development processes or experimentation or talking to your customers, when you have 365 product managers, you need a little bit more, right? You need a little bit more help there than just like, hey, all of you go make roadmaps. So I was responsible for going in there and being like, okay, but what does an initiative actually mean? What's our scope for an initiative? What does it mean here? How do we put it in the right tool? Are we going to use Jira for this? Are we going to use a road mapping software? At the time, we were really using Jira Roadmap, which I hate. But it was like, how do we get that into the right places? How do you make sure everybody knows how to scope what the right levels are? When do we actually go back and review what the roadmap was? Who should be invited to those meetings? All of that was up to me.
Right.
But then it was, how do we get the data to the teams so they can actually make those initiatives? We had a big data problem at the time, and we were starting to integrate Amplitude. So the teams were getting used to data, but we didn't have a really good mechanism to get all the information back to 365 people so that they could make good business cases. And they knew that they needed to, right? But we just had to dig it out of the systems. It was taking a long, long time. So that's where we said, hey, let's actually set up this division, which we called product operations. And the product operations team was responsible for making sure that everybody had the right information to make their business cases, to actually monitor if things were going well. They oversaw the Amplitude installation and made sure that people could track the right metrics. They were responsible for the different meetings and cadences that we would have to do at scale when so many people are involved in it, right? We're talking about like 6 to 8 different business lines and products. Sorry, we're talking about 6 to 8 different business lines and products. So it's not as simple as just, going to everybody and saying, hey, what's going on? What format are we going to put them in? What tools are we doing? Right. There's a lot of work that goes into there. And that's why product operations is critical. Because if you're the product leader, if you're the chief product officer, your most important thing that you could be doing is making sure that you are setting the right strategy. You're doing the work that needs to go into doing that strategy. You're working with the rest of the C-suite. You're mentoring and working with your VPs across the board. And you want to be concentrated in that area and, growing your team, thinking about org design, thinking about hiring, thinking about capacity planning and budgeting. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Do you need to be the one person who says, hey, let me go do all the calls to figure out if we should use this roadmap tool or that roadmap tool? No, but you're going to decide like what you want the roadmaps to look like. And then you need a team to go make sure that it's going to happen across it. That's what we're talking about when it comes to product ops. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a necessary thing when you're scaling. And that's where my experience comes from, is like, at scale, what do we do? And in smaller organizations, it's going to be much more lightweight. And in large organizations, there's going to be more people involved.
Okay, so there's a lot of great things in there to explore. The first thing is, you mentioned these 3 pillars that basically constitute product ops. What are those pillars about?
So the first one we call data and insights, and that's about getting the information that's locked up in our systems out of those systems and in the hands of people making decisions. So that could be, and this is what we would do when we set product strategy. This is always what I do with it when I set product strategy. It's like going into the financials, trying to figure out your customer segmentation. What's your ARR by customer type? You want to know things like, what is the work in progress that's happening right now? What's the revenue pipeline look like per customers? What's the most important feature requests that are coming down the line? All of those types of things are usually locked up in systems. And if you want to be a great product manager, and especially a great CPO, you need to be able to put the financials behind what you're doing and why, or the metrics on the product level. So it's about getting that stuff out so that you can do the research from those tools and start to build a way to query it and back up with data what you're doing. The second pillar is called customer and market research. That's about aggregating the customer and market research so that it gets back to the teams. What we see is that a lot of places, customer research is extremely siloed. So, in every organization I've been in, it's like, hey, that team over there talked to a bunch of customers last year about the same topic that a team over there did. They have no idea, right? They have no idea that that research has been done. Now, that's not to say that that research might be good, but it could be a starting point, right? It could be something that saves you a month of research to actually go from there and start to read it. Why is it locked up, right? Why is it just hanging out in Google Docs and not aggregated? It's also about things like, hey, there's tons of good customer research living in support and in the sales force or anything that the sales teams are doing, sales calls, for instance. How do we get that information out to the product teams so that it's not just one salesperson coming over and yelling like, hey, this customer needs it, but we can get a steady stream of what they're asking for, and we know what the pipeline looks like, and we know, what's coming down the line and what's the most requested features and things like that, so we can put some data back to it. So that's a customer market research side. This side also helps with things like TAM sizing, SAM sizing, being able to go out, see what competitors are doing. It's about getting that information back into the hands of the product team. So that could look like subscriptions to market research platforms. It can look like having somebody there to help you do a SAM sizing or a TAM sizing on a data analysis perspective, but anything that helps you put more weight to what the opportunity is there. The last piece is the process and governance, and that's the part where people always get a little cranky. That's what I'm talking about when it's on the operating model of what do we do as a product team, and how do we make sure that we are revisiting our strategies on the right cadences, and what do those meetings look like? How do we actually set strategy? What kind of artifacts are we using across the board? What kind of roadmap tools do we want to use? So they take care of tools, but they take care of cadences. They also are making sure that we're working in consistent ways. It's like where we define our guidelines for how we want to work and how do we put that out there. A big issue on that one too, that I think a lot of teams like neglect, is the relationship between product management and go-to-market. Usually we have great relationships with developers and product management or UX because we're talking about Scrum, we're talking about cross-functional teams, and we forget about the go-to-market side and the sales side. And there's still things that need to be done there to make sure that we can launch our product and make sure it's successful. So it also looks at that across the board. What's that working relationship? How do we define those things? And it's not meant to be burdensome. It's meant to be just what things affect the rest of the company, where we do all have to agree on one way of working.
Okay, so the three pillars: data insights, so basically quantitative insights, customer and market research. So here we're talking about qualitative research, for example, customer interviews and so on. And then the third pillar, process and governance. So all things tooling, cadences and so on. So, okay, let's say you have a product ops team dealing with all of these things. I think something that usually comes up is, okay, if you have data science team that is already supporting the product management team or the different product teams, do you then pull these people into a product ops team to report to the CPO so that you have that stream of data now actually being focused on what product managers need? Or how do you deal with those scenarios where there's already a data science team somewhere and there's already user researchers? How do you navigate, or how do you recommend people navigate those scenarios?
Yeah, basically, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So if you don't have a problem with these things, do not change it. That's not what we're advocating for here. But many organizations just don't have that. They'll have a data science team, but then they are fighting for prioritization to get them to help with product. In that case, I would take some data science people and put them under product ops and have them be fully dedicated to the product team, because it's really important that we can make strategic decisions. But if you have a data science team, like Doodle is a great example. Doodle has a data science team, but they allocate capacity to product. They never have to want for more. They set up a self-serve tool so that anybody can query whatever they want and be able to connect everything back to the financials. Like in that case, I wouldn't say, hey, you need like take them all out and put them in product ops. Like, no, it works. If it works, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But if you don't have that and you can't make those decisions, that's where having dedicated team members becomes important. Same thing for user research. on the user research side, and we write this in the book, there are people who do research ops. And unfortunately, in a lot of places, I find that user researchers now are getting cut, or, with the whole zero ZERP, thing and everybody getting laid off, a lot of user researchers getting cut. I think that's awful. I don't think that's good for business. User research ops also, is going by the wayside. I think that's needed. To me, like, I'd hire that person in under product to run the customer side, the customer insight side, right? That's the type of background that you would look for there. But if you have a dedicated research ops team that's under UX, that's great, right? Like, as long as they're doing the things that help feed that into the teams, I wouldn't replace that, or I wouldn't move it. But if you are looking to fight for budget, or if people are, experiencing trying to justify their existence out there, product ops might be a good place for you to look to.
Okay, so one of the questions is, so you mentioned about as you're scaling, it's important to think about these things. So when do you recommend people to actually start bringing in, or starting with product ops, and how do they start? Do you recommend people start with one person? Do you recommend people starting with a trio ops responsible for these three pillars? Like, how do you see, from the feedback you've gotten now from, working with different people implementing product ops and listening to these leaders doing this, what's been working the best, do you think?
It really depends on what size your company is and what do you need the most. I would say pick one problem and try to solve that first. Now, if you're in a really large organization, like we're talking enterprises with multiple thousands of people, you've got hundreds of product managers, you're probably going to need more support on this. I'd go for hiring a leader first and then let them build out the team. So then they're going to decide, should I have somebody under market, the market research side or the customer research side? Should I have somebody on the data side? And I'd also look for where the gaps are. So I identify the gaps and say, where do you need to start first? If you're a small team, if you're a small SaaS scale up, what we typically say is start from the data and insights piece first. And you might hire like one product ops data analyst to just help you, because at this point, rapid growth SaaS companies are characterized by trying to make good product strategy decisions very quickly, because you're scaling very fast and things are changing very fast. So in this case, what you are doing is you need somebody to be able to pull that as a CPO and help you with that modeling so that you can make good strategic decisions. So you need somebody to sift through all that data and get it going. And that's usually where they start. So I'd say maybe one person there is a great place to start. But I would look at like, where is our biggest problem first? And then try to knock that problem out, prove some value, and then go from there, start thinking about growing the team from there.
Okay. And how do you see this relationship between, let's say you get one person, and let's say that this person is trying to cover a little bit of all these three pillars. And when it comes to customer and market research, how do you see that collaboration between that person and, for example, a product team that is already doing continuous discovery, or at least trying to do continuous discovery, getting those insights, and then all of a sudden there's this product ops team who's sort of responsible for that or parts of that? How do you see this collaboration working the best, and how can you leverage both competencies and work in a better way, basically, to support the team?
The team should be doing continuous discovery. What product ops is there is not to take away the fact that you have to go talk to customers, is to make that easier. They're not doing the research for you. What they're doing is thinking through systems. How do we scale systems, right? So let's say a team goes out and does user research. Where does that live? The product ops team on that area is saying, hey, maybe we need to get a tool like a Dovetail where we can dump user research in it so that everybody can log on and actually see what's been done already. This is the process for getting your user research back into Dovetail, right? They would set that up. Or what they would do, and we did this at Athena Health, we had a research ops team that was led by Jen Cardello. She now leads it at Fidelity. It's one of the case studies in her book. What we did at Athena Health was we found that we had 365 people going to the same hospital over and over again to do research because they knew they would say yes. The hospital started to get tired of that, right? And now we got one data point from one hospital. So what we did is we said, hey, how do we make sure that people can get in touch with the customers, and how do we know that they're going to opt into research? How do we make this a little bit easier on everybody's end? So they created a system where they put all of our customers and users into a database. They emailed all those users and said, hey, by the way, time to time, we do things like user research and we do experimentations, or we show people new features that we're doing. Would you like to opt in to giving us feedback on that? So we, spray and prayed on that and then let them opt into the type of research they want to do. And then how frequent. Do you want us to contact you once a year? Would you like to do this once a month? We took that, we put that into the database, and then we opened it up to the product managers and the user researchers as well, and the UX people, and said, hey, here's the people who agreed to this. When you go and talk to them, like mark it down so that we know not to go bother them again. This is how we, do load management and make sure that we're not bothering everybody. And also, by the way, here's their account executive. Talk to them first to make sure they're not angry at us or anything like that. But we also talked to the account executives and said, don't block the user research, right? These people said, yes, they would like to do it. You don't have the authority to just completely block it unless these people are on the line, right? Like they're not happy with us or they're up for renewals or whatever. So when we did that, now everybody's getting the right type of research, right? They're able to find the different types of persona. They're able to talk to more different users. They're able to get in touch with them faster. The users know what to expect. We set expectations. And now everybody can go do their user research. So I think this actually enhances continuous discovery because it cuts down on the recruiting. And that's usually why people don't do user research, is because it takes so much time to recruit people. So that's what we're trying to do here, is to really streamline things like recruiting and load management and who do you get in touch with and tool sets for doing user research and where does that user research live after you actually do it.
Exactly. So it's basically unblocking the team to make better evidence-based decisions, basically.
Yep.
And basically unblocking and empowering them with what they need to make that process as smooth as possible in different areas, basically.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so then the question is, so imagine you have this product ops person, he starts to trying to help these teams making better decisions, recruiting users, or bringing tools like UX Signals, for example, here in Norway. It's like a tool to automate recruitment for user interviews and stuff like that. So you start getting all these things, and at some point you start standardizing tools across the organization. Like you mentioned, Dovetail. I actually used Dovetail at a company I used to work in as well. So how do you deal with sort of the cons of standardization in a way, of like some teams maybe perceiving that standardization as disempowering, of like, hey, but this is not how we want to work? Or how do you typically deal with those pros and cons of standardization?
I have a great story about this from Spotify. So I was consulting with Spotify back in 2014, 2015. So they do not work this way now, but this is how they used to work. I was brought in because we were doing user research on release management. Turns out that every single team between New York and Sweden could release with whatever tool they wanted in whichever way they wanted. I talked to something like 50 to 60 different teams. People were like rolling their own platform, right? Like they were building their own release management tools. That's what they were spending their time on, right? They weren't spending their time on like AI or discovery playlists or anything like that. They were like, oh, well, we would just build our own. And there was 4 different teams rolling their own. And when I got done, there was maybe 20 different systems people were using. And it was a free-for-all. And everybody had to figure out how they were going to release when they got to the team. They also weren't using like any standardization like Jira or whatever. People had sticky notes of what they were building on the walls. There were Trello, there was Jira, there was whatever you want, Asana. It didn't matter, right? Spotify was so obsessed with autonomy that any team could work the way they wanted. That broke, right? Like talking to people who were there, who've been there forever, they're like, oh yeah, we got rid of all that. Like we started standardizing all those things because it broke, right? And I saw it break firsthand because it got to this point where you're saying, what is everybody spending their time on as a leader? And you have no idea, right? You have no transparency into what work is being done. You can't make decisions as a leader then. You also, every team is duplicating a bunch of stuff, right? So you've got teams building the same thing over and over again. That's where standardization comes into play, right? It's not about taking away a team's autonomy and how they want to run things on a day-to-day basis. And I do believe in product ops, you want to take the team input, right? I think of product ops as a product manager is for product managers. So you're going to go out, you're going to do the user research, you're going to find the best tool for them. But then you're also going to justify it with like, hey, you might not want to use Dovetail, but it's the best solution for us right now because I can't have you out there just doing a bunch of user research and dumping it in a Google Doc that nobody's going to see, right? Like if you do it this way and you put it into Dovetail and let's create a system that's as easy for you as possible, this is how we're going to be able to benefit from it in an organization, right? Like that's the pitch there. So like even Spotify ended up standardizing their entire release management after that, and they have one tool that does all the releases now. I think they built their own at the end of the day, but I'm not sure exactly where it went. That was my recommendation. They were working on it, but now a lot of those things are standardized because when you scale, there are some things. There's information, right, that other people need in the organization. You can't silo it into just a team, right? That's not how we work well cross-functionally. That's not how we can be agile, right? I think a lot of people get confused between agility and autonomy. You can have autonomy. Agile is about autonomy and decision-making around what you're going to build from a product perspective. And you want some degree of autonomy about how you are going to work with your team, but you can't have full autonomy at scale. Otherwise, it breaks the agility because you can't be agile if you can't make decisions. So if the rest of the organization can't make decisions based on what you're doing, you broke agile, right? You broke agile by being autonomous in the way that you work for everything. So I do agree with a degree of autonomy. Like, I don't care how people run stand-ups, right? I don't care how you actually communicate with your team on a day-to-day basis. I don't care what types of meetings you have when it's like a team level or like a pod level. That's fine, right? But then as soon as it involves other teams, and especially cross-functional peers or leaders trying to get oversight and make decisions themselves, right? That's where these things become really important. And that's where we do have to agree on one set of tools, one set of, governance or processes that we want to do for these critical moments. So I'm not for like over standardizing everything, but there are critical things where we do have to say, does this prevent us from making strategic decisions that keep our business in operations? And if the answer is yes, then we got to fix that.
Okay, that was a really interesting story. And what I find interesting about this story is that they had to sort of fail to learn that it doesn't work. So I'm wondering, is that how it has to be,
Hey.
or when do you know that, okay, you know what, we need to start standardize a few things, we need to bring product ops, we need to, when do you know, is there like a recipe in a way that people can more or less, or are there any flags that people can identify? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, these are the flags, we probably should start standardizing things. Or is it very contextually and you just need to sense it as a leader and take that decision?
It's I hope people don't have to fail to learn it, right? This is the experience that I've had and the experience I've seen other people have as they got to product ops, right? Most of the places that came up, it's not like I came up with product ops. People have been doing this. And the way that they've been doing this is that something broke and they try to fix it. And then they found out like, hey, this is a pattern. This actually breaks in a lot of companies. Maybe we should start thinking about how do we fix this at scale, right? What does this actually mean for our organization? And if you think about it, like product ops is not that different than like revenue ops or sales ops, right? DevOps. All these teams have ops, right? All of a sudden, like now we have ops and everybody's like, oh, do we need it? Everybody has ops, right? It's how you run these things. Now,
absolutely.
I hope we get to a point where people don't have to fail to learn it. But in my experience, a lot of times it does take a failure for people to actually get some momentum. So I'm hoping we can preempt it and get there before people learn these hard lessons, or they can look at it and say, hey, I'm experiencing one of those problems. Let me just try something to see if it fixes that and helps us, get through this hurdle. But I've worked with a lot of organizations, I think in many different capacities, where sometimes you do need to go through a tough spot before you're like, oh, okay. Now I'm ready. Now I understand why that's important. And that's okay. That's not bad as long as you can course correct early. If you course correct late, that's where things start to get a little detrimental.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes a bit of storytelling as well. I mean, every time you're bringing change, if you have the good storytelling and if you are leading with context and so on, that's going to be smooth anyway. But if you come in and you say, hey, now all of you have to use this tool, then of course you're going to get a backlash, especially in Norway, for example, where it's a very flat, like Scandinavia in general, very flat cultures, and teams do speak up and say, hey, I don't want to use this stuff, and it's kind of, okay. But you mentioned DevOps and so on, and I agree, these ops have been here for at least for longer than product ops as a discipline in a way. But back to the third pillar, process and governance, I think that's where the buzz is coming from, which I don't really hear from DevOps, for example. So product ops brings this. There's some people, again, back to kind of the comment from Marty Kagan and from other people, like they argue that governance and process, that's sort of an extra layer, it's not necessary, blah, blah, blah. And I totally agree with your point that, well, it gets to a point where you need to have some degree of practices, you have to have some ways of governing your organization. So I guess it's maybe how you bring that change to the organization so that you avoid this buzz and this sort of people opposing to it. You avoid this? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think what Marty goes on about in his process stuff is that he doesn't want process people. And I agree with him to a degree, right? Like I understand the backlash that we've had from Agile, where we had all these Scrum Masters, all these Agile coaches. Like we had a lot of people talking about process and not doing a lot of work. I don't think we should have that, right? I'm not talking about product ops needs to be a role embedded in every product team. Like that's like from a squad perspective, right? That's insane. It shouldn't be that way. I think of process and governance as a system. And I think about it as what tools can we do to automate this, right? Who's going to oversee that though, right? Who's going to bring in those tools? Who's going to like define the practices? I also do believe the product leader should be the one responsible for defining the practices. They're saying, I want it to work like this, but who's going to do the work to, let's say, record that, socialize it, make sure that everybody knows what they're doing, especially when you have thousands of people, right? It's different when you're a VP of product over 10 people, right? Exactly. But if you have to, like, let's say you have a junior team, like this is what I go through when I work with organizations that are doing transformations, for example. Like it was a role that I kind of played as a consultant for a long time. I had to go to the teams and train them, right? And make sure that they knew how to work in these processes. I had to define the processes. I had to write it up. It was a full-time job. And it gets to a point where people start grooving and, you know, doing it. And then you got to go back and refine them. And you got to make sure that that works, right? And I do think that this is not something that needs like 18,000 people in the organization to do that. But I do think there needs to be somebody on top of it actually studying it, watching it, you know, refining it, just like you would define development processes or anything like that. That's where I think that comes into play. And I hope we get to a point where a lot of the manual work that it takes for product ops actually gets automated away. I think that would be fantastic. But in a lot of these corporations that I work with, like I work with Fortune 10 companies pretty much every day, they have teams of people who report into a CTO or a CIO, and they're responsible for that, right? They're in the midst of great change. And when you're in the midst of great change, you do need somebody there to help usher that change throughout the organization. Like as an executive, you could be the spokesperson, you could say what it looks like, but you do need a team to make sure that it's going to actually happen and that it's enforced, right? And that you're getting feedback from the group about what's happening. That doesn't mean that you're disassociated with it. It just means that you have people there to help. And that's where I think that process and governance becomes important. It's not about having like 10,000 people in that organization. It's not even about having 50 people in that organization. It's about having a small SWAT team that goes out and makes sure that they're getting the feedback and doing the research and doing product management for product managers, right? About the way that we work. And that's how they approach it.
Yeah, no, I like the way you frame it. And I do think that there's a bit of a blend between, like, as you said, like product and then engineering and design and then go to market and then product leadership, and product ops sort of helps unblock and helps foster the principles that leadership wants to foster. So it's basically this role to enable. And I'm sure you're familiar with team topologies and the work of Manuel Pais and Matthew. Do you see then? I'm not sure if you probably thought about this, like product ops through the lens of team topologies. You probably even talked with them about this. But do you see then product ops team, for example, as an enabling team, as a service, sort of serving different product teams? Is that how you see it, or do you see it differently?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah, it's an enabling team.
And that makes sense. And that makes sense to me. Then I have another question. And actually this question comes from Marta Ness. She works at Aiden. So you know Marius from Aiden.
And speaking of Aiden, This is worth interrupting the show. Aiden is looking for a director of product management, a critical role for their product org. Aiden is solving really important and hard problems in healthcare, now in Norway and outside Norway in the future. And as a director of product, you will build a high-performing team of product managers, drive product success, and contribute to and execute on Aiden's product vision. If that's you, please check the link in the show notes and reach out to Marius.
Marius from Aiden. They basically have 10 product teams, and they have a small product ops team. You probably know that from Marius. So Marta is a product ops manager, and then they have a product analyst and a UX ops lead. And she was wondering how should product ops teams measure their success. So imagine you have OKRs for the different product teams, cross-functional teams. Do then product teams contribute and share those OKRs, or do you have like an OKR for the product teams itself? How do you measure success basically as a product ops team?
I mean, I would think about it as leading indicators the same way that you would think about product indicators, right? If you tie product ops directly back to ARR, it's going to be really hard to like make that case directly, right? It's going to take a lot of effort to actually get there. So I would think about it as what kind of metrics can you show to help unblock teams, right? So you can look at it from how fast can we make decisions about product strategy? Can we cut down the time that it takes actually to do our product strategy meetings and our roadmap meetings? Can we cut down on the rework that we might need to have to do to go back and make things into the right format or into a digestible way? Can you cut down on the time that it takes a team to make a decision, from a data perspective, or to monitor their strategy? I think all of those types of things is what I would look for. It's like it's efficiency metrics, but it's also quality of decision making too. So you should be able to tie it back eventually to do we make the right decision from a product strategy perspective, right? At the end of the day, I believe product ops helps prevent failures because it helps you make more informed decisions. If you don't have the data, you can't set product strategy. If you don't have the information on what your customers are doing or what your financials are or anything like that, you can't set product strategy. It's a huge hurdle for a lot of chief product officers out there. And I see a lot of product teams just flying blind, and they'll commit themselves to something. They'll go, they're like, oh, I ran like a little test, but they didn't get good data back from the test. So they just said, let's build it. 6 months later, they launch it. It's a failure. Why? It's because they didn't inform the decision, right? So if we have better informed decision-making, even before we start experimentation, I think experimentation is part of that, but we have better data to make better hypotheses. I think we'll get faster actually delivering better products.
Very good. Melissa, let's change to a different topic. Let's talk a little bit about CPOs, because you run one of the most successful CPO accelerators in the world. So I do recommend people that are listening to, if you're a CPO and are listening to this conversation, then check out Melissa Perri's CPO Accelerator. And so I want to dig a bit into the struggles that you see most CPOs have. So I want you to let's try to talk a little bit about this. What do you see most CPOs struggling with when you get to a chief product officer role?
The biggest issue I see is that they do not know how to contextualize what they want to do with product back into business metrics to help reach the goals of the business. So when we start off as individual contributors, even when we're directors and a lot of VPs as well, we'll talk a lot about, product development processes and road mapping and what we're doing with our products. And we're not changing our language when we end up into the C-suite to be that of a C-suite and a board. So the biggest failures I see when a new CPO comes in, especially from a board level, so I'll sit on boards and watch these presentations, so that they'll tell me all the things they're doing, and it's a laundry list of stuff, and the board looks at them with blank eyes, and they go, okay, so like, where's the money, right? Like, how's that make money? And that is the biggest struggle that I see with it. It's like, you have to be able to tell a story about how you did the research, how this was the right path to go, and then this is how we're going to get there from a product perspective. And if you can't tell that story, that's where it fails. So a lot of new CPOs struggle with financial modeling. They struggle with making those models of, kind of predicting what you might get or what the impact is of what they want to do on their roadmaps, and then communicating that back in a way where the board goes, okay, I get it. I see the path to whatever number I want to do. I also tell everybody too, it's like, you got to start with what the board wants for your company, and then you got to work backwards. So if you're PE backed or VC backed, even if you're public, right, there's a goal somewhere, There's going to be a revenue goal. There's going to be something. So when you're setting product strategies, you got to know what that is, because if you want good buy-in from the board or your CEO on what your roadmap is, it has to match up to that. Most CPOs get the boot when they can't tell that story, or when they're not informed or not aligned with what the board is actually expecting from the company. So that's something that I teach a lot of CPOs is like, start from there. Go ask your board, like, hey, what's our exit plan? I work with PE companies and VCs all the time. I go, all right, so where is this? I ask it too, right? Where is this company going to go? What's your exit strategy? Sometimes they're like, we don't have them right now. We're not sure if it's going to be an acquisition or it's going to be an IPO, but we got a goal to get to $1 billion valuation. Here's our ARR right now. This is the ARR we need to see to be able to do that within the next 3 to 5 years. That's a goal, right? So you go back and you look at your roadmap and you say, is that roadmap going to get us there? And to do that, you have to add a certain amount of money per year, right? That's really what we're looking at. So you need to know, is this company in a cost play? Do we care more about EBITDA? Do we care more about multiples of ARR, right? How are we valued? You have to understand all of those things, and then you have to tie it back to what you're doing. Because if you're focusing on the wrong, let's say, customer segment, or there's not enough growth in your market for what you're building, that's not going to get you to your goals. So understanding all of those dynamics is really critical, I think, for a CPO to succeed in the C-suite. And that takes a deep understanding of financials, the way your business is valued, what your board actually expects, and then you bring in the product. And if you do this right, what you're doing is you're starting from the C-suite, and now you're a peer of the C-suite. So this is the second biggest mistake I see them make, is forget that that's your first team. Those are the people we work with every day. Those are the people you need on your side. And you are no longer like, sales over here, product over here, like, I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you. I hate the CRO. You can't do that anymore. It's like CRO and you were best buddies, CFO and you were best buddies, right? And you sit down with them and you say, hey, let's like figure out what our strategy should be as a company. You're now part of the company's strategy too. And you're prioritizing and you're doing the modeling with the rest of everybody and saying, are we going up market or are we going down market? And then you're bringing that product lens in to say, hey, if we do want to go up market, here's all the needs of the upmarket segment from a technology perspective. Here's what we have to do. Are we capable of doing that? If we are, how long is it going to take? And does that make the requirements for what our board wants to see, right? Those are the choices. Those are the decisions. Those are the conversations that you're having as a CPO, which is a little different than when you're a team member or a VP, when it's more about like, hey, when's this thing going to get released? Let me go run an experiment on a feature. Let me talk to the UX about this workflow. Like, you're focused more on the nitty gritty of what the product is doing. But at the C level, you got to make sure that you're a steward of the business, not just the product.
Very well said. And when you mentioned financial modeling, I just thought about, well, but is that because of lack of skills? Or is it because that person is unable to communicate with the CFO? Because of course you could get help from your peer, now the CFO, to get that financial modeling and to tie those dots together. But then you mentioned it immediately after, so I don't need to ask that question.
It's, you know what, it's all teachable skills too. Like what I'm talking about as well, I think anybody can learn them. And I'll say it's something that we go through in CPO Accelerator. If somebody wants to learn it earlier, Gift Constable, it teaches a class on Maven for exactly this. He shows you how to read PE sheets and all those different things and your profit and loss. And I think that's really important. So a lot of people came to product management from tech and they won't have those skills. A lot of people came from the business. It's actually interesting. Most of the product leaders I meet in larger organizations that are going through transformations, they've never done product management before, which I do think is a problem. But they're really good at the financials and they're used to justifying business cases and they're fantastic at the financial modeling pieces, but they're not used to the tech pieces and they're still learning tech. They're still learning product strategy and they've never really worked with a team. I don't think that's necessarily great either, but I do think a lot of skills can be learned. And as long as people are willing to learn and try and like give it a good shot, that's what we're looking for. But that's why I started CPO Accelerator, because I was like, I want people who've grown up in product or been product managers to get those positions, right? A lot of times you see people hired in as a CPO or a VP of product with no product management experience, but they know how to have that conversation, right? They know how to talk financials. They know strategy from that perspective. And I do believe all that's teachable for people in product.
Absolutely. Melissa, it's been a pleasure talking with you again. Where can people find you these days? What's the best place to find your stuff and to,
Yeah,
and to get in
definitely
touch?
follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm posting most of my thoughts these days. If you go to productinstitute.com, you'll find our online school, and productslabs.com is our landing page right now, although we're trying to move it all to Product Institute to get things all set up there. So I hope you connect with me there.
All right, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss out, and see you next time.